So, how's it going, everyone? I'm Maxi. I'm an artist at Embark, and I have been there for around 8 months. I have been doing 3D for close to 9 years, and most of that time I spent it in 3ds Max. And I have been following Blender for the past time since 2.8 was announced. It was very cool to see it growing. There was a lot of similarities with 3ds Max, especially modifiers and the way some tools worked. So by the time I was going to join Embark, it felt like it was the right time to do a transition. So today I'm gonna speak about some clear doubts that people usually have when they start using Blender, and some doubts that I had as well. Some general tips and tricks on how you can transition and make the transition a bit easier. And it is important to know that the focus of this talk is going to be around the 3D modeling area of Blender. Even if it is about 3D, it's not going to be a guide into 3D as a whole, and it's not going to be a guide on how to specifically do things in Blender. I'm just going to go about some tools that Blender has and how you can use them to find different approaches to do things. So, when you start Blender, this is going to be your first choice that you're going to have to do, and it's probably something that was highly debated in the community as well, shortcuts. What do you use? Do you go the industry compatible way, or do you go into the Blender standard ones? And there's actually pros and cons to both of them. If you go the industry standard way, you're going to feel way more comfortable with it out of the box, especially if you come from Max on Maya. However, there's a really good point in using the Blender ones, since it's going to be way easier to follow tutorials with, and it's going to teach you how to do things the Blender way. And there's a very important thing to take away there. When I started, I jumped into the industry compatible ones, and I customized pretty much everything straight away. It was kind of painless to transition, but I missed a lot of things on how Blender does things. And I picked it up with time, but it would be super nice to pick it up from the beginning. So a personal advice, stick with the Blender ones, at least for a week or something like that. Give everything a try, and once you start to feel more comfortable with it, start implementing your own hotkeys. Something about the hotkeys. Everything in Blender is context sensitive. So a context is basically an area in Blender. For example, 3D view, that's an area, that's a context, and every area has sub-contexts in it. Those are smaller areas inside it. So for example, in the 3D view, you have the object mode and you have the mesh mode. So we have two different ways to set shortcuts. You can either set it by right-clicking something and assigning a shortcut to it, and that's gonna automatically decide what context that goes in. The other way of doing it is you can go there and you can go in the preferences, and that's going to give you a complete list of all the context and how the keys behave. So if you feel like you need more control on how things execute and where they execute, you can do it that way. When it comes to the interface, there's a lot of really cool things that you can do with it to speed up the workflow. You can use math in pretty much any of the interface, and that's super cool when you want to do super precise snapping, or I don't know. You can hover over things and press the minus key on the keyboard, and it's going to quickly invert parameters. You can also copy and paste parameters super quickly. You just need to make sure that the parameters that you're trying to copy are the same type, so you don't copy vector 3 into an angle or something, because it's not gonna do it. Unit conversions as well. You don't need to do the unit conversion somewhere else. You can just type that you want something to be 10 centimeters, and it's going to do it for you. Same with resetting values. It is super quick to just hover over stuff and hit backspace and quickly reset things. The 3D cursor is one of those things that Blender users usually love, and people who come from other software are like, what is this? And it is that small thing over there. It is basically a point in space, and it might not sound super exciting, but you can do a lot of things with it since it is so integrated into Blender. It is a standard way to place new objects, so you can quickly snap it in different places, and it's gonna place the object in there when you place a new one. You can use it as a transform pivot as well, and I'm gonna get on that a bit later. And you can use it as well to like snap the origin to different locations as well. Now, when it comes to tools, Blender usually has like two different ways of showing you the tools. One is the active tools, and then you have like the normal tools. The active tools are usually ones that you access from the toolbar on the left, and they have like visual gizmos that you can use to do different actions. The tools are the ones that you usually access from any right-click menu. You can search through them through the operator search, or just access it through a hotkey. It is important to know that they always yield the same results. The only difference is the way you interact with them. So if you're a more visual person, you can go with the active tools, but if you prefer hotkeys, you can go with the normal tool, and they're usually easier to use once you get used to them. Here's a couple of random tips for tools. This one is pretty known, but it's still worth it to remark it. Since everything in Blender has a context, whenever you right-click, you're gonna get a selection of tools that are actually very useful for the context that you're in. For example, if you're like in the face context, you can get to like extrude faces or like insert faces, and same for like pretty much any context. This not only applies to this, but like the node editor and any other editor in Blender, like you're gonna have the same thing. Shortcut hints, like you should look into the menu, into the UI for shortcut hints whenever you're in a tool. This is super nice to see what ways you can interact with it, like how you can change it with like a different tool as well if you're using the transform tools. You can also have direct input in them. So if you are moving something and you want to move it like 2 units directly to the right or to the left, you can just like use the grab tool, like start moving it, and then you just like click 2 in the keyboard and you're gonna move it. The operator search as well. It is super nice for finding pretty much any tool that you need in Blender that you don't really use all that often, but right now you really need to use and you have no idea what it is. It actually saves a lot of time in those cases. Now, when it comes to selection modes, Blender is usually a bit different to other 3D software. The selection modes are not sticky. That means that it doesn't store selections for like for vertices, edges, and faces, but it just converts between them. And when it does the conversion, it usually runs down the conversion. So if you select 3 vertices, for example, and you need like to select 4 for a face, and you switch to face mode, it's not gonna select the face. So that's something that you should keep in mind. The X-ray mode, it actually impacts selection compared to like Max or Maya, where it's not really the same. So if you want to select the back faces, you need to make sure that the X-ray mode is on, so you actually see them and you can select them as well. Something super cool as well is the transform pivots, and it is something that people usually miss. You can actually change what is going to be the pivot point for your transform operation. So you can use the individual origins one, and this one is super nice. Like it basically grabs a face and it takes a look at all the faces that are connected to that one, and it makes like small faces groups, and each one of them are going to have an individual origin. So whenever you scale something, each one of those are going to scale independently from all the other ones. The medium one is pretty standard, like it just grabs the median point of everything in the selection. A 3D cursor, once again, like you can quickly place the 3D cursor somewhere, and that's going to be the center of your selection, of your transform. And then it's the active as well. An active element in Blender is whatever you have selected last. So that face, for example, is the one that is brightest. That's how Blender shows you which one is going to be the center of the transform. Transform orientations, like these are pretty much in any software, but something that is usually missing in Blender is that small plus button. It actually allows you to set up a custom transform orientation. So if you want to rotate, scale, or move stuff in the orientation of that face, you can select that face, click the plus button, and then you can get the orientation of that one. And you can store more than one as well, so it's super nice. When it comes to object types in Blender, it's important to know that they're actually made of two different elements. On one side, you have the object, and that's basically the container for your transform. And then you have the object data, which actually defines what type of object that is. If it is a mesh, it's going to have all the information that you need to define one of those. This is an important distinction, and something that is really important in Blender, since like you can have more than one object data used by two objects, and that brings us to linking, which is instancing in Maya. You can have more than two objects as well. This is just an example. In there I show like, I don't know, let's say you have a car and you have like a left wheel and a right wheel. The green part is the same mesh, as you can see there, and the orange one is the object. Vertex groups are a pretty nice property of mesh objects, and it is basically a group of vertices that is stored together. I mean, it is pretty cool as a thing to just store selections, but it becomes even better when you combine it with modifiers, for example, and then you can actually start masking selections from things. Talking about modifiers, they're probably one of my favorite parts of Blender, especially as a Max user. So they're basically automatic operations that you apply on top of your geometry, and it is super important to know that they're non-destructive, and that's where the powerful things come from. They are super iterative, and since they can be stacked, you can do a really cool combination of them to get really complicated results from super simple geometry that you can keep editing forever, pretty much. Like, here's an example of some pretty simple geometry that I apply a solidify modifier on the top to get some thickness, and then some booleans to take some parts away from it, and then you apply a level modifier, and you get a sort of like automatic high poly kind of thing. This is something that we use all the time. If you have decals, you want to apply decals to something, you can get some planes close to the surface that you want to project it to, just align like the normal direction to it, and you apply a shrink wrap modifier that's going to bring the objects to the surface, and then you can transfer normals to make sure that they shade correctly as well. Shading is something that is maybe a bit confusing in Blender, and you kind of need to think about it, going from like the general part into the more specifics. By default, an object in Blender is flat, and that means that the normal for every face is going to point up of that face, so that's not really helpful, I guess, but you can make it smooth, so now all the normals are average. That's nice if you want blob, I guess, but you probably want a bit more control, and that's when auto smooth comes in, and that basically gives you an angle that you can set, and it's basically going to go for the faces and take a look at every edge and take a look at the faces that are close to it, and if the angle between those faces is actually bigger, it's going to make it hard. So then you can combine it with sharp edges as well to specifically tell it like what areas you want to be hard, and this is basically the same way as you do it in Maya when you set up hard edges. If you want the ultimate control, you can use custom normals, and in there you basically go either with a modifier or like you can do it manually and specifically decide what angle every normal is going to have. Empties are a special type of object, which is pretty much the same as a 3D cursor, but it lives in the scene, so it is a coordinate point with no geometry or anything special. However, they're like super useful. Like if you want to organize your scene in a more like Maya type of way, where you have empties and you make childs for them, you can use them for that. You can also use them with modifiers to control the way they behave. Like here I'm using it with an array modifier to do a radial symmetry, and then you can move it around and you change the behavior of it. And you can also use it for storing positions, like in that super amazing weapon I just see there. Like, let's say you want to export it to a game engine, you can set up a locator for like the barrel and like a stock, and then you export it. Now, when it comes to scene management, Blender has mostly two ways to organize them, and the first one is a classic parenting example where you have a parent and you have child that you assign to it, and whenever the parent has some transform applied to it, the childs are gonna have the same transform applied to them as well. Blender introduces collections as well, which is basically a logical way of grouping objects together. They're not physically grouped. That means that there's no transform happening between them, and you can have more than one collection having the same object. So that's super nice for organizing the scene in different ways if you work with modular objects. Something else as well is that you have view layers, and it is basically outliner presets, if you think about it, because you can go in and you can set up the visibility for every collection, selectability state as well, and you can store it, and then you can make a new one. So in that example, for example, like let's say you have a lot of collections and you're trying to make a vehicle, you have the chassis in one side, and then you have like different vehicle bodies that you can switch between. You can just go in and make vehicle 1, and that's gonna have like vehicle 1 hidden, I guess. It's actually the same picture, and the other one should have the other one hidden. Orphaned Data. In Blender, everything has links, so whenever you make a cube and you delete it, its object data is gonna be there, like left without any users. And that's basically an orphan, and that data is going to be there until you close Blender. Whenever you save, Blender has a garbage collection functionality, so anything that doesn't have any users is gonna go away. And that's pretty nice, but there might be some times where you're making a material or something, and maybe you apply it to an object, and then you make a new one, but you still want to keep it for the future. That's where fake users comes in, and it's basically that shield that you see in this one. You can basically assign a user that doesn't really exist in the scene, but is gonna make sure that since the object has a user assigned to it, it's not gonna go away when you save the scene. Now, when it comes to performance, there's a couple of things that Blender has a bit of trouble with at the moment. First is like big objects, like they really drive Blender a bit crazy, I guess, especially with the editable mesh performance. Like it is way better to have multiple smaller objects in the scene compared to like a few really big objects, because if you go into edit mode, it's gonna go super slow. The subdivision modifier is really effective by endons, so try to keep them kind of like either triangulated in some areas where you want to have endons, or either quad capped. And Control Z right now is a big offender. If you have a lot of objects in your scene, it goes super slow. It's kind of like linear with the amount of objects that you have, so the more objects you have, the slower it becomes, since right now it's actually evaluating all the objects whenever you Control Z. However, there's proposed fixes for this in this year. Like they just announced the 2020 big projects, and all these big issues are actually part of the proposals for this year. Well, I'll just talk over it. I'm gonna post the slides later so you can all watch the video. It is the same video I was sharing in our blog. Basically, Eevee is amazing. It gives you the ability to sync any game engine that you have, so you can achieve like visual parity between Blender and your game engine. This was an example of me doing like a shader that uses Vertex paints, and you can export it into a real and get the same results basically. You should look into it, especially if you're using workflows that use more than one UV. It is super nice, and it speeds up everything a lot. Now, when it comes to add-ons, add-ons are basically a collection of scripts that people do, and they can either like add new functionality to Blender or make the functionality that already exists way faster. These are some official add-ons that Blender ships with, but for some reason they are disabled, and I think they should be enabled since they're so useful. The first is Bool Tool, and it's basically a super simple plugin to help a lot with booleans. Like instead of having to apply a modifier and like manually selecting everything, you can just select two meshes and use this, and it's gonna take care of everything for you. Copying up attributes as well, like this one really enhances copy and pasting functionality of Blender. Like you can copy rotation, scale. You can copy modifiers as well within objects. Modifier Tools. It is amazing for managing big modifier stacks. And loop tools as well. This one is a personal favorite, especially when doing subdivision modeling. It is super nice for handling, like, let's say you have a loop and they all have the different distances between them. You can make sure that they have the same distance, or if you want to turn like a closed loop into like a circle, you can also do it. When it comes to community add-ons, there's a couple of add-ons that we really use. The first one is machine tools, and I couldn't really find a GIF to make justice to it because there's so many really cool functionality into it. It is basically a collection of buy menus and a lot of like mesh modeling tools to really help you modeling. QBlocker as well is basically object creation in the style of like Maya or Max if you like that. It's super nice. Text tools is basically a lot of really cool UV functionality added to Blender because Blender UV by default is a bit dry, I guess. So you should really use that one. And then the Embark exporter and the Embark tools, we use it all the time. I don't think I should say that, but it's super nice for setting up all the collections in your scene, and then just making sure that they export to the correct folder with the correct name. And yeah, we also have a couple of context-sensitive tools that are super nice. When it comes to commercial add-ons, there's a couple that we really use a lot. The first one is Hardups, and it is basically a collection of workflow assisting tools. It takes care of booleans, it takes care of like smoothing and a couple of different things as well. Like it really helps with modifiers and assigning materials as well. Box Cutter, it is amazing for making quick booleans in a very visual way. And then we also have like UV Packmaster, which is a super nice packer with a lot of extra functionality as well. To close in this presentation, you're learning a new software. You probably have your ways in whatever software you come from, so try to keep an open mind. There's going to be new ways to do things, and if you try them and you really try to understand them, like you might figure out that you actually like it better than what you had before. For UV mapping, you should take a look at that tutorial by Daniel. Like, I think we all look at it at Embark, and it is amazing. Like, it has pretty much everything you need to know about UV mapping in Blender. The manual for Blender is amazing. It's super concise. It is very visual. You can search for whatever you want to know, and you're gonna find it. Like, you should look into it. And then there's also the Blender artist community. That community is full of like super experienced people that have been using Blender forever, and they're very passionate about it as well. So if you can't find something in the manual or a tutorial for it, you can sure ask for it in there and somebody's gonna help you. Yeah, that was pretty much it.